When the fires of the Second War cooled and the Horde's banners were torn down, Ironforge stood, scarred but unbroken. And atop its throne sat King Magni Bronzebeard, not just a survivor, but the sovereign of a people victorious. His people had withstood the siege, his halls had never fallen, and when the gates finally opened, the Bronzebeards marched along their new allies into what was in truth only their second war, 2 for 2. And, learning from their ancestors, they did what any sensible dwarf does. They fortified. The Bronzebeards helped the Kingdom of Stormwind rebuild its proud city, but they were frustrated. Aid took too long, reinforcements even longer. If another war came, Stormwind would need Ironforge's strength faster than a messenger could ride. So, Magni Bronzebeard made a decision. To solve that problem and bind Ironforge to Stormwind, he ordered the construction of a wonder the world had never seen, the Deeprun Tram. And to build it, he turned to the greatest inventor on the planet, High King Gelbin Mekatork of the Gnomes. Between dwarven ambition and gnomish technology, an unparalleled accomplishment is achieved. A subterranean artery beneath the sea, fusing two kingdoms together with dwarven steel, gnomish brilliance, and a whole lot of stubborn pride. It's a wonder so unbelievable, jealous goblins like Hindenburg in Stranglethorn still tried to convince people it's just a myth. It wasn't just a tunnel, this was a declaration. The dwarves are not your sidekicks, they are a pillar of this new alliance. So with the tram complete and the kingdom fortified, Magni turned his gaze inward, not to comfort but to curiosity. In the years after the war, dwarven prospectors began stumbling upon ruins that didn't match any in their histories. They weren't troll, they weren't human, and they weren't dwarven, at least not quite. Towering statues with familiar silhouettes, walls etched in ancient glyphs, vaults made with craftsmanship that dwarves should have recognised, but didn't. The implications were staggering. Maybe the dwarves weren't born under the mountains. Maybe they weren't shaped by time at all, but by gods. That revelation changed everything. King Magni Bronzebeard made a decision that stunned his kingdom. He turned Ironforge's entire industry from mining to archaeology. And that's where we have to pause. I found myself saying this a few times in this series now, but we really shouldn't understate how big a shift this was for the Bronzebeard people. Just think about it. The dwarves awoke from stasis only 2,500 years before the Dark Portal opened. That's after many events players assume were more recent, just because we saw them first. It's after Illidan was locked away, after the humans and the High Elves went to war with the Imani Empire. It's after the founding of Alterac, Gilneas, Kultiris and Dalaran. It's often lost on people just how recent the dwarves, as we know them now, really are. And despite those 2,500 years, the Bronzebeards barely left Khaz Modan. So imagine what it meant when their king told them, stop digging the mines you've known for millennia and go and explore the world. It must have felt like madness. But what's even madder? The Mad Lads did it. The Bronzebeards took to exploration like elves splitting into a sub-faction. They answered the call to uncover their forgotten past, establishing the Explorers League and shooting off to every corner of the planet. Now, that is a story I hope to cover in depth another day, but for now, just remember this. The Bronzebeards went from isolationist mountain dwellers to Warcraft's poster boys for exploration in 12 years. What exactly did you do in the last 12 years? But now that I've made you feel bad enough about your life choices over the last decade, let's segue into the next chapter. Magni didn't establish the Explorers League alone. He did so with his two younger brothers, Muradin and Bran Bronzebeard. Princes of Ironforge though they were, neither had much interest in staying cooped up playing politics. Both would play major roles in the dwarves' quest to rediscover their origins. But let's start with Muradin. By this point, Muradin Bronzebeard was already a name known well beyond Ironforge. He'd served as a liaison to Lordaeron during the Second War, before Ironforge had officially joined the Alliance, and he even took part in the Battle of Blackrock Mountain. After the war, he became Ironforge's ambassador to Lordaeron, and by all accounts, he did a bloody good job. He was part of the diplomatic circles deciding the fate of the traitorous Alterac. He grew close to the royal family, and most importantly in my opinion, He was on a first name basis with every chef in the palace. Smart move if there ever was one. And fatefully, one day, while wandering the palace halls, Muradin got himself a bit turned around, only to stumble upon a young human prince making an absolute fool of himself trying to swing a sword. Arthas, the boy who would one day become the Lich King. Muradin, ever the pragmatic sort, took one look and decided, I can fix that. And just like that, he became the prince's mentor, training him in swordplay, survival, and the fine art of not dying stupidly. Now, we all know where Arthas' story ends, but I often ask myself, was it really Frostmourne that gave him the power to become the most terrifying villain in Warcraft history? Or was it in fact that he was trained by a dwarf? Hard to say, and honestly, I'm not sure we'll ever know. But mysteries aside, Muradin and Arthas became close. They adventured together, they fought together, and eventually they returned to the place where Muradin had cut his teeth years before, Northrend. One final, fateful expedition. It's a story as old as time. Dwarf goes on expedition to the frozen north. Dwarf gets separated from his team by ravenous undead. Prince of Lordaeron happens to be on a vengeful field quest in the same frozen wasteland. Their gazes meet across the ice. They discover a cursed rune blade together, and one friend leaves the other to rot in the snow. Yes, a true fairy tale. But it probably deserves a bit more. So, Muradin had travelled to Northrend many times before, drawn by its harsh beauty, ancient architecture, and the creatures that called it home. On one such journey, he uncovered the whispers of a powerful artifact, a rune blade known as Frostmourne, sealed within a hidden vault deep in the frozen wastes. The Explorers League took notice. A branch known as the Dwarven Expedition was dispatched to recover the blade, but the deeper they went, the worse things became. Undead activity surged. Muradin was cut off from his team and found himself in dire straits. He thought his luck had turned when Arthas appeared, seemingly just in time to help him reunite with the others. He could not have been more wrong. But by then, Arthas was already halfway down a vengeance-fueled road of no return. When Muradin told him of the blade, Arthas didn't see a relic to be studied, he saw a weapon, a way to save his people, a way to win. They journeyed together to locate the vault. Inside, Frostmourne lay encased in ice, and there was an inscription. Whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit. Now rune blades are rare, unthinkably powerful, but Muradin was no fool. He knew a cursed relic when he saw one. He told Arthas, leave it, give up on this path of vengeance, and lead your men home. But Arthas was already lost. He seized the blade, and in that moment the ice surrounding Frostmourne shattered, exploding outward. A shard struck Muradin, and Ironforge's noble prince fell, dead. Or so it seemed. And Arthas, Prince of Lordaeron, Muradin's student, he did what any good friend would do in that situation. He left him to rot in the snow. Arthas, now wielding Frostmourne, sealed Lordaeron's fate with every step. He used the blade to slay the dreadlord he'd come to destroy, his vengeance fulfilled. But something inside him was already broken. He abandoned his men and wandered deeper into the frozen wastes. Back in the Eastern Kingdoms, the Scourge was spreading. Lordaeron was crumbling. The Third War had begun. And when word of Muradin's death finally reached Ironforge, it hit like a hammer. King Magni Bronzebeard, who loved his brothers more than gold or glory, was shattered. He grieved. But, like many dwarves do, he grieved through duty. And Magni would soon get the chance to channel that grief. Alexandros Mograine, High Lord of the Silver Hands, stood before the throne of Ironforge. With him, his advisor Fairbanks, and something far, far more precious. A crystal of pure light. A weapon, they hoped. A blade to turn against the darkness. But it needed to be forged. And for that, they came to the greatest smiths on Azeroth, the dwarves. Masters of earth and forge, some say dwarven master smiths can pour their emotions into weapons they create, binding sorrow, honour and fury into steel. Magni didn't know if that was true, but if it was, he had plenty of emotion to work with. So he took the crystal and he went to the forge. Not just any forge, the great forge of Ironforge itself. He didn't speak, he didn't sleep, he didn't leave. For 3 days and nights, King Magni Bronzebeard stood before the anvil, and with every strike of his hammer, he remembered. He remembered Muradin's laughter, echoing through the mountain halls. He remembered Arthas, just a boy once, looking up at his dwarven mentor with the eyes of a prince who still had hope. He remembered what the boy became, and then the rage began to rise. Magni had never believed in the old tales that a dwarven smith could pour their emotions into the weapon they forged, that sorrow and fury could be etched into steel just as surely as runes. But standing there, grief in his chest and fire in his back, he didn't question it anymore. He let the fury in. He let the sorrow burn, and he hammered until on the third day, the forge fell silent. What remained was not just a sword. It was vengeance made holy, a weapon of light, tempered in loss and love and rage, the finest weapon Magni had ever forged, the Ashbringer. He could only hope it did not come too late. As the final sparks faded from the forge, word reached Ironforge. Arthas had returned, and he had slain his own father, King Tyrannus Menethil. Magni placed the sword in Mograin's hands, with solemn grace and a heart weighed down by grief. He offered his condolences, and then he offered more. Riflemen, engineers, engines of war. Ironforge would stand with Lordaeron, but even dwarven steel could not halt what was coming. The Scourge swept across the land like a plague made of flesh, and the kingdom fell. While war consumed Azeroth, a quieter tragedy struck closer to home. Gnomeregan fell. Invaded by trogs and sabotaged from within, the proud gnomish capital collapsed beneath the weight of its own brilliance. Nearly 80% of the gnome race was wiped out. The survivors fled, shattered and clinging to hope. Ironforged opened its gates. The refugees were granted sanctuary, and the gnomes built a new home within the city's walls, Tinkertown. But not everyone was happy about this arrangement. Some dwarves were misplaced to make room. One of them, a bitter dwarf named Squerto, still vents his frustration in-game. To quote, "I used to have quite the home back in Ironforge. That is, I did until I was booted out to make way for the gnomes. They couldn't stop a bunch of trogs with all them gizmos and machines. And I have to pay for their weakness? No sir, no longer. Go to Gnomeregan and talk to Commando Murdoch. Sure, he's a gnome, but his crew's safe, I think that's what they call them, are going to take Gnomeregan back. Go! I want my house back." Whether it was called Tinkertown then, or became that in time, isn't clear. But one thing is, the strain on Ironforge was growing. The gnomes were grateful, the Bronzebeards were generous, but not every dwarf accepted the cost of compassion. And in the heart of the mountain, pressure was building. Meanwhile, the crisis deepened far beyond Khaz Modan. Quel'Thalas fell to Arthas, Dalaran to Archaeology. The eastern kingdoms were crumbling, and a wave of refugees flooded westward. Humans, elves and dwarves fled west across the sea to establish the first alliance settlements in Kalimdor. Most gathered in Theramore under Lady Jaina Proudmoore, but fewer know this. Around the same time, the first Bronzebeard settlement in Kalimdor was founded. Baal Modan, the Red Mountain in their native tongue. These were the dwarves who first battled the new horde, and would one day stand beside them at Mount Hyjal. When the world was truly on the line, the Bronzebeards were there. Even far from home, their hammers still rang true. At Hyjal, the mortal races would beat back the Burning Legion, and though the Third War would rage in pockets across Azeroth, the Battle of Mount Hyjal marked the twilight of the Bronzebeards' part in it. They had lost a prince, taken in the gnomes, founded a stronghold in a foreign land. With Lordaeron fallen, the Bronzebeards now stood shoulder to shoulder with the newly rebuilt Stormwind, one of the two last bastions of the original alliance. The Night Elves began to grapple with their new mortality. The Alliance and Thrall's fledgling horde would begin carving out their places in a reshaped world. The Bronzebeards had endured yet another war, but for King Magni, the next blow would strike far closer to home. For this time he would not lose a brother, but his very own flesh and blood, as his daughter Moira vanished into the depths of another mountain. Thanks so much for making it this far. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please leave a like and subscribe if you would like to hear more deep dives into Dwarven legend. Thanks again.